Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. The formula is as usual. We have a special guest joining us later on, and our special guest is Derek Sloan this evening, who is the leader of the Ontario Party, a political party in Canada. He's got a tale to tell. And we're also going to discuss things in Canada compared with things in Scotland. Earlier on this week, Jordan Peterson offered his opinion that Scotland was even madder than Canada. So we're going to settle this once and for all. Derek and I are going to talk about various areas, and we're going to see which country we think is basically the worst, is the madder. And we will declare an official result later on this evening. So that's going to be interesting later on. But as usual, I will start with a little bit of news, a few things that have been going on in Scotland I thought were worth talking about. Now, I'm going to share the screen here. This might not go very smoothly, but here we go. So I've got a few newspaper clippings. So let's have a look. Let's start with that one. Fireworks crackdown risks being undermined by bad legislation, warns Scottish Police Federation. Now, I haven't followed this story very closely, but basically they're looking at further restricting fireworks in Scotland. Now, this is quite a difficult issue. I mean, some people say their dogs get traumatized. Some people just don't like the noise. They say it goes on for too long. And then there's the issue where sometimes people have bonfires in certain types of area. Maybe the fire brigade end up getting called out and the fire brigade get pelted with rocks and fireworks or whatever. And so inevitably, the Scottish Parliament being the Scottish Parliament, there's only one direction of travel, and that is towards personal firework displays basically being banned. Everything has to be licensed and official and professional and preferably run by the government or the council in some form or another. So you just know the Scottish Parliament. That's where the MSPs are going to end up taking things. I don't know how long it'll take them to end up at the total ban on all fireworks, but that's the direction of travel. It's just inevitable. You know what they're like. Now, what's lacking in there is the person who's going to argue, hang on, for generations, typically like dad and kids will buy some fireworks and they'll have such great fun with them. It'll be a real family bonding time. It's a little bit dangerous, so you have to be a bit careful. So there's a bit of learning through that as well. You learn to be responsible and to take care and to do things properly. And it's just great, really enjoyable. So for generations, it's been a really colourful part of life for families in Scotland. But say, the direction of travel, I think it won't be too many years before that is history. Right, here is another story that caught my attention. Labour candidates' conversion therapy links sparked LGBT anger. Now, this is Kieran Turner, who works for the Evangelical Alliance, a Christian sort of lobby group, basically. Well, that's the side he works on in Scotland. And he's standing as a Labour candidate, and he's got it in the neck from Labour LGBT activists. Now, part of me thinks I'm sort of on his side, and these people who are basically trying to get him kicked out of the Labour Party, trying to stop him standing for election, I think they're wrong. They're very intolerant. I disagree with their views. But on the other hand, I'd say to Kieran, what did you expect? What did you expect being a candidate for the Labour Party? That's their policy. That's what you're encouraging voters to vote for. And so, in one sense, I sympathise with him, but in the other sense, I don't really. I just think you've put yourself in that position, and this is inevitably what's going to happen. So, that's that. The other problem is that Kieran, in presenting himself as a Labour candidate, he's saying to people in Scotland, I urge you to vote Labour. I think you ought to vote Labour. I think Labour is the best party. Just by saying you're a Labour candidate, that's what you're saying. Effectively, it's campaigning on behalf of the Labour Party. The Labour Party that has its policy the full decriminalisation of abortion. So allowing killing unborn children right up to birth. So Kieran's saying, that's not a deal breaker for me. I work for the Evangelical Alliance. I'm an evangelical Christian. But for me, the killing of unborn children right up to birth, that's not a deal breaker. I still think you should vote Labour despite that. Because that's not that important an issue. You still should vote for Labour because there's more important issues that mean they're the best party. Well, I would just say that I disagree with Kieran on that one. So poor old Kieran is getting it from one side from the Labour Party activists, and is also getting it from me as well, because I don't think you ought to be representing the Labour Party. But hey, that's politics. And party politics, everyone is your competitor. Like everyone in a different party is your competitor. And so that's the story there. Scottish Qualifications Authority. Fears grow for exams agencies, morale falls. Now, what's happening here is the Scottish Qualifications Authority is going to be scrapped, basically. To be honest, I don't think it really is. They're just going to rebadge it. I think the same people are going to be in the same building doing the same things, but they're claiming they're reforming it. Now, as far as I can see, the main crime of the Scottish Qualifications Authority has been to try and be a little bit sensible and try and maintain standards through the pandemic a little bit. And for that, they're being punished by being, well, rebadged. I'd imagine the senior staff are going to be out of a job. And this is basically led by the Green Party and other, I would say, fairly extreme educational activists who want to do away with exams completely. So if you don't want any exams at all, a good step along the way is to shut down the exams agency, isn't it? And replace it with something new where you can get your ethos to be a bit more influential. SQA, all these statisticians and standardization, all of that sort of thing, they don't want any of that. They want it to be a bit more touchy-feely, teachers choosing the grades type things, because that's more in line with the modern ethos of Scottish education. So that's the SQA. Now, one more. I didn't hear this, but this is the report of it. Keir Starmer says Boris Johnson is a disgrace on every level and lacks integrity, honesty, and transparency. Now, the thing that that reminded me of was quite often people will say about the Scottish Family Party, about myself as well sometimes. They'll say, oh, I'm very, very critical, very, very aggressive and personal in the comments I make about people. But I look at what Keir Starmer said there about Boris Johnson. I would say, I'm not sure I would ever go that far in terms of personal criticism of an individual. I would say I stop short of that. So why is it that when the leader of the Labour Party makes a real harsh personal attack on someone, no Christians say, oh, I could never vote Labour again. I couldn't support the Labour Party. The way he launches those personal attacks on Boris Johnson, no, that's it. I couldn't possibly support them. No Christians say that. How come it's okay for the leader of the Labour Party to launch that, say, a really personal, harsh attack on a competitor politician? Whereas when I do something, or representatives of the family party say things, they're probably not as strong as that. They're probably a bit more guarded and a bit less personal than that. Then a lot of Christians go, oh, you need to be nicer than that, or I can't possibly support you if you're sort of not going to be nice. Well, I think there's a double standard. And I would urge people to judge the Scottish Family Party by the same standard that they judge the other parties as well. Right, that's just a little bit of news. No live stream would be complete these days without a quick mention of the election campaign. We're giving in the paperwork for candidates at quite a rate. And even today, we've had some more candidates coming forward saying that they'd like to stand. So it is not too late. If you want to be a family party candidate, next Tuesday, it definitely will be too late. But if you are interested in standing, as I say, you need to fill the paperwork in, and that gives people the opportunity to vote for what they believe in. We can usually make it so that your address doesn't appear in the public domain at all, and you're not expected to campaign if you don't want to. No one will be able to contact you directly if you don't want them to. So it very much is doing the forms, and we will run a campaign. We will deal with any communication, and you've done your bit. It's a really valuable contribution to the party. So if you're interested in that, email chairman@scottishfamily.org, chairman@scottishfamily.org. Drop him an email right now, and he will get back to you. We'll do it. We might even arrange it so, for example, someone will call round at your house with the paperwork. We can do it all, take it away that evening, and that's it. Job done. Okay, it might be as simple as that to be able to do it. So if you are willing to stand with us in that regard, I say just email chairman@scottishfamily.org, and we'd really appreciate your help. Come and join the team. Right, we now move on to our special guest, who, just looking at his icon here, it appears he's on mute. And here he is. Derek, welcome.
Thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you with us. We're really looking forward to hearing your story. So where are you exactly in Canada at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm in Belleville, Ontario, which is fairly central in Canada. It's about 2 hours east of Toronto, which is our biggest city, and is about 2 hours also from Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada.
Yeah. I just did a quick spot of research about Ontario. Something like 15 million inhabitants. So it's sort of going on 3 times as big as Scotland in terms of population. So we're talking about a pretty sizable
Yeah,
chunk.
and geographically, it would probably be I don't know 20 or 30 times or even more the size of Scotland. It's a pretty big chunk of land.
Yeah. I've never been to Canada. Everyone who goes comes back raving about it. But I've never been. Maybe one day. I would. Have you been to Scotland?
I haven't, although at some point in the past, my ancestors did tarry there for an undetermined amount of time, probably about 500 years ago, before going over to Northern Ireland. So, there's some connection there.
Okay. Well, a warm welcome awaits if ever you want to come and visit.
I will be there.
Yeah, right. Well, we're really looking forward to hearing your story and hearing about the Ontario Party. And again, we're then going to produce the official, decisive, objective decision on which country is madder, Scotland or Canada. But we'll get to that later.
Looking forward to it.
Just start off by telling us something about your political journey that's brought you to this end point of the Ontario Party.
I will do that for sure. So I used to be a federal Conservative member of Parliament. So that would be a member of Parliament at our highest sort of stage in the House of Commons here in Canada. I was with our Conservative Party. That's our federal Conservative Party, and I ran for leadership of that party in 2020. And I didn't win, but I certainly increased my prominence in this country. I said some things that got me in trouble, but I was a very strong, pro-life, pro-family candidate. I had a lot of criticisms about the government's handling of COVID-19 and our own health minister, our own chief public health officer, and how they were acting as well. And I was, in trouble in the media a lot. After the leadership race, I was actually kicked out of that party. The leader that did win was trying to get rid of any competition in the party, and I was kicked out. Can
you just ask about that? Was there any particular issue, any particular comments that they picked up on, or was it more vague?
Yeah, so the excuse that they used initially is that I had received a donation from somebody who was racist. And if for anybody who's familiar with political financing, in my leadership race, I had 13,000 separate donations. This particular donation was for $131. We had raised about $1.3 million over the course of the leadership, and the vast majority of that was online. So people would donate online. There was no it's not like someone's handing you a check or lots of things or even anything about the people that are donating. So it was a red herring that nobody really bought. Even the hostile media didn't buy it, and so they had to shift to sort of more vague. Well, he's just not a team player and things like this. In all actuality, they were trying to take a far more centrist, left-leaning route, and they didn't like that I was questioning lockdowns, transgender surgeries for minors, vaccine safety and efficacy, just basic questions that were I believe fair questions to ask, or I'm still asking them, and these were not the type of branding that the leader wanted. And so he basically took a run at me and was able to remove me from the party. I remained as an independent for a period of time after that. I was not reelected in this most recent election. In our country, probably the same in yours, it's very challenging to win a riding as an independent. So if you're not connected with one of the mainstream parties, it's very challenging to break through and to win. And so that was so I was unable to be reelected. I recently took over leadership of the Ontario Party, which is a provincial party. So in Canada, we have a federal government, but we also have provincial governments in the different provinces and territories. So this party will be running to be the premier or the leader of the province of Ontario. And so that is what I will be running for. We have, again, a first past the post voting system, both provincially and federally. So we're going to have a bunch of candidates running in different seats here in Ontario. There's 124 seats in Ontario, and we intend to have a full slate in this upcoming election.
Fascinating. The thought was running through our mind then. I wonder if you would have survived in the UK Conservative Party.
It's a good question.
My thinking would be maybe in Scotland, Scottish Conservative Party, probably not. In the UK, borderline, I would say. I can't think there'd be anyone maybe quite as far along as yourself. But I think that would be a bit borderline. But in Ontario, I'm interested, is it the same? Is it the national political parties that operate in the Ontario elections as well? Or does it tend to be different parties?
Yeah,
the local level?
So they're technically different. They're legally different entities, but a lot of times there's crossover in terms of, volunteers for the federal Conservative Party will often volunteer or, maybe be on the board of directors locally for the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. So that's the name is slightly different. There's a Liberal Party of Canada, Liberal Party of Ontario. So the people involved are friends, and there's often crossover. People who maybe used to sit as members of provincial parliament may eventually become members of parliament for the federal version. But they're technically different organizations, although they're often friendly to one another.
Could you just get that term again? The Progressive Conservative Party.
So the name of the Conservative Party in Ontario, the brand name Blue Party in Ontario, is the PCs. So the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. Yeah.
That's okay, right? Interesting.
And they live up to their name. They live up.
I propose that the UK Conservative Party should be forced to call itself that as well.
Well,
be a bit more honest.
The interesting thing is that our major Conservative Party in Canada was also called the Progressive Conservative Party up until their merger with an upstart right-wing party, which was called the Reform Party, and then the Canadian Alliance. They merged, and the leader of the Canadian Alliance was Stephen Harper. They merged with the Progressive Conservatives, changed their name to the Conservative Party of Canada. That was in, I believe, 2004 or 5. And then that United Conservative movement held government in Canada from 2006 to 2015. So that was when Stephen Harper, who is, the most conservative leader that we've had in some time in this country. So up until recently, the federal party was also called Progressive Conservative, but there was a new party that kind of came out of nowhere and had significant prominence that added new life to the movement.
Okay, fascinating. Just say hello to all the people on the comments. Good to see you. Some regulars, some new names as well. We'll try and bring some comments in later, but we're keeping an eye on them. It's good to see you. Now, the Ontario Party, tell us about that. What are your main policy areas, focuses?
Yeah, so in Canada, the province has control over a lot of things, and it's actually exciting. So they have control over education, they have control over healthcare, they have control over many of the areas that were affected by COVID-19. So when it came to vaccine passports, when it came to lockdowns, when it came to the colleges of physicians and surgeons and this type of thing, preventing professionals from speaking their mind. All of this were provincial things. So we have control over, if we were to win, we would have control over those kinds of things. We have policies relating to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, education, both at the elementary and post-secondary level. And we also have policies relating to housing, healthcare, and free speech and generally.
Okay. Well, that sounds not dissimilar from the family party. All contexts are a bit similar as well. The issues you said, they're devolved in Scotland as well. They're dealt with by the Scottish Parliament. So we're in quite a similar situation. The one thing we've got different is that it's not entirely first past the post in Scotland. It's complicated, but there's a proportional representation element in it, which means small parties are in with a chance.
Yeah, and I like now. What is the percentage of like I've heard of this? It's probably a mixed member proportional system or something like this, where let's say 80% of the vote or 80% of the seats are first past the post, and then another 20% are sort of divided according to popular vote. Is it something like this?
It's about 60%, I think, are first past the post.
Okay.
Then the remaining 40%, you have two votes. The remaining 40% are determined by what's called your list vote. And Scotland is divided into 8 regions, and then within each region, they add up the list votes and then allocate additional MSPs. But the number of MSPs you've won in the constituencies influences the chance you're going to get on the list. So basically, if you've won all the constituencies, you're not going to get anyone elected on the list. So the list is designed to balance it up to make the overall results a bit more proportional. But the system is still designed to keep small parties out as well. If it was full proportional representation, then I would be a member of the Scottish Parliament now. But they make it so you need at least 5 or 6% to be able to get an MSP elected. So they're still tilted. It's inevitable, I suppose. The existing parties create a system that's tilted in favour of the existing parties. Is there any talk of electoral reform in Canada?
You know, there's always talk. The Justin Trudeau had actually promised in 2015 that would be the last first past the post election, right. But then they did not follow through on that promise. So there's no immediate sort of work on that, but there's always talk of looking at different options.
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Because the people who make the decision are the party who's just won. The party who's just benefited by the existing system.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah. Well, fascinating. Right, let battle commence in our comparison of Scotland and Canada. I'm delighted to say I've appointed myself as the umpire, just to ensure this entirely unbiased the decisions we make. But let's start with a key area you've already mentioned: freedom of speech, freedom to protest. What's the score in Canada?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we do in fact have criminal hate speech laws on the books. They're rarely used, but there have been some notable cases. There was a person by the name of Ernst Zundel here who was lived in Canada for many decades, but for whatever reason, he was still a German citizen, came here when he was very young. And in the 80s, he had a mail out service or something that shared his views on what happened in Germany with the Jews and so on, and he denied the sort of official, statistics on the Holocaust. Or I'm not super familiar with his writings, but in any event, he had some different ideas on maybe how things happened. So he was actually found guilty of that and ultimately deported to Germany. And there's been a few other cases of things that have happened with that. There's been a fellow by the name of last name Whatcott who has gotten into trouble multiple times for handing out very aggressive flyers at sort of gay pride parades, things with very graphic warnings about what can happen if you engage in promiscuous gay things and so on. And he's had all kinds of issues. But on the day-to-day level, I don't know of a lot of kind of galling examples of people who have been, abused for that. But there's certainly there's a bill that was introduced in the last parliament and will likely be introduced again that would give basically a lot more tools to online hate speech, so-called, wherein someone could actually go before a judge before someone even says anything, and if they convince the judge that someone might say something determined to be hate online, they can get hauled before the court and get fined and get all different number of things to happen to them. So there is an infrastructure being put in place that I think could get very nasty here in Canada in terms of a lot of criticism about that one bill I was just saying is that, again, it's not criminal, so the level of proof is much lower, and the definition of hate is, again, very nebulous and vague. So there's all kinds of things that can happen to someone before they actually do anything online. Now, again, this bill hasn't passed yet, but it very well could be brought up again. So I think we're moving in a very negative direction on some of these fronts, but we haven't seen the worst of it yet.
Yeah. But we're in a similar situation with hate speech legislation. It's been passed by the Scottish Parliament, but for reasons that no one quite seems to be able to fathom, it hasn't been implemented. I don't even know what that means. So it hasn't actually come into operation as far as the police are concerned. So I think we're yet to see that in effect. But we've got something in Scotland called hate incidents. So, for example, a few years ago, I made a video saying that children need a mum and a dad, ideally. Therefore, I sort of disapprove of same-sex parenting. And Police Scotland recorded that as a hate incident, which is not a crime. So there's no trial. I wasn't even told about it. Just someone complains and they record it. But then Police Scotland sent a hate concern form to my employer without my knowledge. To sort of blacken my name. Is there any equivalent to that in Canada?
Well, we certainly do have a, both provincial. We have a provincial human rights commission. Pretty much every province has one, and obviously anybody can complain. At the Human Rights Commission, you have to defend yourself. If you want to hire a lawyer, that's on you. And if you win, there's no costs that you win. You just whatever you've paid. So I haven't heard of any, kind of outrageous examples through that from a free speech perspective, but there very well could be, and there very well easily in the future could be as well with respect to, some of these things. There's been, some decisions that again have broached on the, forcing different kinds of people to be involved in gay weddings and things like this, whether it's, baking cakes or photography. But on the free speech issue alone, I'm not aware of any galling examples from the human rights perspective, but likely many exist.
Well, what's the situation with professions? So if a teacher or a social worker or a doctor or whatever were to make a controversial comment on one of the hot button topics, would their career be in danger in Canada?
Possibly. So certainly during COVID-19, we've seen the colleges of physicians and surgeons and nurses and this kind of thing crack down on professionals for saying things that go against the public narrative, for attending events like freedom rallies and things like this that go against the narrative. Certainly, we've seen people let go from hospital positions, and we've also seen the actual accrediting agencies, come down on certain people. In terms of having an opinion on traditional marriage or things like this. Certainly anybody in a very high profile position would probably be let go if they said something, like if a CEO of a major company, or if a publicly paid doctor that was, in a high position, they'd probably be let go. I don't think the regulatory agencies would come after a doctor or a nurse for having an opinion on some of those things, but certainly in COVID, they have been flexing their muscles quite a bit, and we'll see if that continues after.
Okay. Now, the other one in this category, we've got freedom to protest. Now, that's been in the news, obviously. Most of us have been following goings on in Canada. But what point are we at now? It's been knocked off the news cycle in the last few weeks, obviously. What's going on now with the truckers' protests and the government crackdown there?
So the trucker convoy in Ottawa itself was completely violently destroyed, in the sense that the truckers were literally dragged, sometimes just like broken windows dragged right out of their trucks. So there is no protest right now in Ottawa, but there's many other kind of weekly or protests in other areas. I was at a freedom protest in Toronto just this last weekend. So there are different protests, obviously, at different parts of the country. But the trucker protest is done, but certainly is still looming large in the hearts and minds of many Canadians.
Are bank accounts unfrozen of donors and participants?
So many are. There are still some who are still frozen. There are still people who are being investigated. I would say a small number of people. One of our candidates was, in fact, one of the key leaders of this thing, and he was saying that apparently there's a list of 42 people that are still under more intense scrutiny. But I think by and large, most average people that donated some money are not impacted at this point.
Okay, so score for this general area. I think with the trucker protest response, I think we're going to have to give this one to Canada.
I agree. Yeah, it was shameful what we saw. Shameful.
Yeah. I think freedom of speech was sort of neck and neck, maybe a little bit worse in Scotland with the hate incidents, but overall, I think that's 1-0 to Canada. Right, let's move on. Right, education. I'm pretty confident in this area, but do you want to go first? Or what's going on in education in Ontario?
Sure. So right now we have a sex ed program that is not it does not teach age appropriate things. There is a lot of latitude in terms of what specific teachers can teach, but some of the suggestions in the syllabus for the teachers are very age inappropriate. And I'm not going to necessarily get into all of that here. But there have been some incidences where, for example, kids have been taught that, biological gender does not, or male and female doesn't exist, things like this. There's one prominent case of a young girl that was visibly, hurt by this. And in fact, her parents made a human rights complaint on this issue. It's not clear that this is being taught all the time in all classrooms, but it certainly is at sometimes. There was a bill that was passed at second reading. You need to pass at second and third reading before it becomes law. So it's on its way, but it's not law yet. That would basically implement critical race teaching to children or to the teachers and also the kids. But that is not in place yet as far as a mandated form. But there is, general. There is, there's a lot of wokeness generally that is in our education system. Now, are we talking elementary or post-secondary? Because I can get into some other issues we have post-secondary as well.
If we just stick with schools for now,
okay.
By post-secondary, that would be university.
Yeah. So I'm talking.
Yeah, you can mention university. That's not on my list, but yeah, fire away.
So in universities, we have again sort of a culture of wokeness where certain speakers are not allowed to come on campus. Sometimes they'll be shut down arbitrarily. Things like this. And we've also had most recently wide-ranging vaccine mandates where students who don't have vaccines are just kicked out and they lose whatever progress that they've accumulated.
Wow. Okay, what can I come up with? I mean, in Scotland, in schools, the move is towards abolishing exams because they don't really reflect what education is all about. They just want a more subjective and woolly assessment form. The whole curriculum is chronically woolly. I mean, in terms of what the racism, sexism, LGBT things, I mean, wall to wall. We heard of people say in one of the classrooms, just as an other subject classroom, there are 13 posters up about LGBT issues. The Scottish government's got a policy of LGBT inclusive education, which says that LGBT content has to be included in every subject at every age group.
Wow.
From age 3 in nursery up to the top. In terms of sex education, again, we won't go into details, but it's hard to imagine it being worse than it is in Scotland. I learned about some sexual practices that I had never heard of and never really wanted to hear of, but I've learned about them through seeing them in the sex education curriculum. And pornography use is endorsed as normal, natural, and healthy, nothing to feel guilty about. And they're basically taught that they've got a right to have sex.
Wow.
At whatever age they feel like it. They're told below the age of consent that they've got a right to have sex if that's what they want. The Scottish government's in the process of abolishing punishments in schools. So discipline has fallen to bits. Quite a few schools have a police officer permanently stationed in the school to help the school to maintain discipline. Critical race theory. The UK government has stated that it's illegal to teach critical race theory because it's indoctrination. The Scottish government has stated that it's their policy to teach critical race theory, which I know in America, I don't know how big an issue it is in Canada. In America, it's become a huge political issue. In Scotland, sadly, it barely makes any waves at all. Yeah, so that's the education scene here.
Yeah, no, I think you guys are outpacing us on that one.
Yeah, I think in terms of standards of literacy, numeracy, science, etc., in international league tables, Scotland's been plummeting. Discipline's fallen to bits. Teachers leaving the profession because they're fed up with the abuse and the violence. But it doesn't matter what happens. The answer is always the same. We need to go further in the progressive direction. If we just go far enough, it'll all be fine. And that's maybe a glimpse of what's to come in Canada.
So let me just ask you on the UK front there. So they've banned it. So is that, I mean, so how does that work? I mean, obviously, as you said, the Scottish Parliament has jurisdiction over education. So does that mean in England then that they don't teach it in the schools, or how does that work?
One of the MPs, a government minister in England, said that teaching critical race theory would be breaking the law because it's a political viewpoint and that would amount to indoctrination. So you can discuss it, you can write essays about it, but it can't be taught as fact. Whereas the Scottish government has got the other view. And I've seen a letter written by a concerned parent up in Aberdeen to the government saying, what's going on? My child's been taught this critical race theory. And the government letter in response basically said, yes. And that's right. That's what we want. That is what they're to be to be taught.
So the education in England itself, it would not be the same. Like, it would not include this kind of indoctrination.
I think there's an awful lot of problems in all parts of the UK, but I think in England it's not as bad. I think Scotland is leading the way in the wrong direction. Wales doing all it can. The Welsh Assembly doesn't have as much power, but within their power, they're working pretty hard to wreck Welsh education. But the Scottish government's got more power. So the longer they're here, the more energy, the more time and effort they put into education, the worse it gets. Okay, we've touched on transgender issues a little bit already. Where are we up to with that in Canada?
Yeah, no, that's a really hot issue. So we do have recently enacted a criminal conversion therapy ban that was enacted at the federal level, and it is pretty extreme in the sense that you are not allowed to provide any treatment or service that would seek to change a person's orientation, gender identity, or even gender expression. So that's a pretty extreme. Even focusing on, for example, what a child wears or things like this would be deemed that wrong from this perspective. So again, we'll see. It's a pretty extreme law on paper, and I was very vocal in fighting against it. We don't yet have any examples of anybody running afoul of this, and we'll see how it's enforced because the focus of the law in all the debate, of course, was not on transgender issues. It was on gay or sexual identity issues. So we'll see what happens with that law. But obviously, on paper, that's a pretty extreme law in terms of the quantities of children transitioning and things like this. Obviously, those numbers are increasing. I think that we're going to have one case from the UK that I always point to. I'm sure you have as well. Is with Kira Bell, and I'm sure you're familiar with this girl who sued the NHS and won in relation to she had an early transition starting at 16 or something like that. Now she's in her 20s. She regrets it. So I think we don't have a case like that specifically that I can point to here, but I believe we're going to have a lot of those sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversion therapy ban, we're a bit behind the curve there, but it's at the earliest stages in the Scottish Parliament. And there's every indication that it's going to be one of the most extreme laws in the world in this area. Like you say, I mean, if a parent says, oh, come on, boys don't wear dresses to their 4-year-old, then that would be conversion therapy. And that would be that. Other things, we're in the process of Gender Recognition Act reform, where they basically want to move towards sort of more or less just sort of self-identity. So a person just declares that they're the other gender. So it takes out the medical side of it, the delays that used to be required, in order to get a gender recognition certificate. They really want to streamline and demedicalize the process. Is there anything similar in Canada, or are you already there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When it comes to, and this would be like on your driver's license and things like this, or your birth certificate or things like this.
Yeah. Every official sense.
Yeah. So that's, I'm actually not certain how easy it is to do that. It's certainly not something that's discussed a lot. So my guess is that you're probably further down the road on that. But there are ways to do that here. I don't think it's quite as easy as just going in and saying it. But I'm not 100% sure on that.
Right. But now we're having a census at the moment, and it's come out that the government advises that parents can tick the box for the sex for their toddlers, for like 2 and 3 year olds, that the parents think best describes their gender.
Yeah, I don't think we have that here, or at least not in an easily accessible way like what you described.
Now, I'd imagine you have this. The Scottish government's produced guidance for schools that say, obviously, you teach that changing gender is normal, natural, and healthy. But if a child approaches a teacher and says, I'd like to change gender, then the school will arrange for that child to change gender within school, change name, change pronouns. They'll change their record on the school database, change their, put their new name on the school database, and they'll do all of that without informing the parents. If the pupil doesn't want the parents to be informed, the parents won't be informed. I would imagine that's the same in Canada, is it?
I don't know. I don't believe that happens. I don't believe that happens here in Canada. I mean, it's possible maybe a progressive teacher might enact something like that, but it's certainly not policy to do that, or that they must do that.
Right. That's the government guidance here. I mean, I have to say, I think we're I think Scotland's in the lead on that one.
I think you are in this.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say. Right, the next one, we haven't talked about this one particularly. So the feminist sort of line. I mean, Trudeau's famous for his feminism. What was it? People kind. That was his famous neologism, wasn't it? So what's the situation there with the feminist influence in the government?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Canada, in a certain way, Canada likes to talk a big game and all of these things, but a lot of these, vigorous culture wars just don't seem to really hit the center stage here in Canada on many issues. It's bizarre, and who knows the reasons for that. It is certainly the case that feminism as such is in vogue. It is popular in academia. It's popular in higher education. It's popular to be spoken of, to be used as a rationale for doing things, even by conservatives. Whenever they want to argue against something, if they can find an argument that hinges on feminism or diversity or something, they always will use that. But in terms of actually how it's impacting us here, I'm not entirely certain. I mean, there's always discussion of, oh well, we need to worry about this pay gap, and we need to get more women in executive level offices and things like this. And obviously, companies are incorporating diversity policies. But it's hard for me to think of a kind of galling example of feminist overreach. I could just tell you personally, when I was in law school, I went back to law school a little bit later in life. I went to law school when I was 29 after I had some time in the real world for a while. So I went there in 2014. And at the time, the feminist ethos was very common. For example, there was one meeting one day, the subject of which was, why don't we have all 9 of our Supreme Court justices to be women? It would be better, kind of thing, right? Like that was par for the course. But in terms of actually, having, examples on the ground of how it's negatively impacting, I can't think of any beyond now. Of course, Justin Trudeau, he did a 50-50 cabinet, 50% men, 50% women, just because he wanted to have a gender balanced cabinet. And of course, that's negative for the country. I mean, for one, he did not have 50-50 MPs, right? So he was culling from a smaller percentage and
Yeah.
highly likely there was, very qualified people that were not given not given ministerial portfolios. So, that's a pretty obvious example I can bring up.
That's basically degrading the quality of the government.
Absolutely.
If you're choosing them from a small, but we've got the same here. We've got a gender balance cabinet. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's first minister, she says basically the world would be a better place if women were in charge of all countries.
So you have a male first minister. Nicholas is a male.
No, female. Nicola.
Oh, Nicola. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
She's a female supremacist.
It sounds
she just thinks that women are superior to men. But the pay gap business, I'd imagine the same in Canada.
Yeah.
There's a lot of companies now. Companies have to publish their pay gap. In Britain, that's a law.
Yeah. So you know what? I think certainly not all of them, and a lot of times it's voluntary. But I don't believe there's certainly there's certainly not a law like what you've said for everybody.
Yeah, it's not for all business. It's for bigger businesses. So what a lot of people are reporting is when it comes to the round of pay increases and promotions, basically the women get a bigger pay increase than the men. And the women are more likely to be promoted than the men because they've got to close the pay gap.
Yeah.
This is often, these decisions are made by the men at the top, but the men at the top know that the way what they've got to do to stay at the top is to be feminists.
Yes.
So out there, if you're a white straight male and you want to get to the top and make a fortune in business and become the managing director or whatever, what you have to do is be a feminist and a sort of critical race theorist or whatever. Then as a white straight male, you can get to the top, and that's the game they're playing. But I'll tell you what else we're in Scotland. This is on its way. When we had our hate crime legislation, it had all of the protective characteristics, so racially motivated crime, homophobic, etc., religious motivation. When it came to sex, the feminists said, no, we don't want sex because that would mean a woman could commit a hate crime against a man. They said, we don't want that. We want a crime that can only be committed by men against women. So the government said, okay, fair enough. So that's what we'll do. So they haven't put sex in the hate crime legislation. They're coming up with a new misogyny law to make sure it's only men who can be prosecuted for hate crimes related to sex. So if a woman stabs a man to death while she says, I hate men, then that's not a hate crime because you just can't have a hate crime committed by a woman against a man, which I'd say it's just beyond parody. It's unbelievable. But this is passing through the Scottish Parliament uncriticised. Wow. Not a single MSP is saying, no, this is just wrong. This is just not fair. Well, it makes no sense, but that's where we are.
Well, so how many seats do you have in the Scottish Parliament?
The Family Party, or in total,
or just everybody? Like, what's the total seats available?
129.
Okay, so very similar to Ontario. And how many? Yeah. There must be a Scottish Conservative Party or a centre right party.
There's a party which goes by the name of the Scottish Conservative Party, and they have, I think it's 31 seats. And the other parties are all sort of progressive, left-leaning, or hard left parties.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's very, very skewed. And the Scottish Conservative Party are very timid. And they're basically allergic to any of these sort of controversial culture issues. They just won't go there at all.
Yeah.
They won't go there.
Yeah.
So I think we've probably edged it again on that one.
I think you have.
Right. Well, there's not too long left. We've got how about assisted suicide, euthanasia? I don't know where Ontario is up to with that, is it?
Yeah, so we're getting pretty bad. Some of the provisions have not come into force yet. So there was an expansion of. So we didn't even have euthanasia up until basically a Supreme Court ruling and the passage of a particular bill. I think it was maybe 2016 or something like this. So it wasn't that long that we've had euthanasia. It was just expanded recently during the last Parliament. And some of the provisions of that bill don't even come into place for another couple of years. But basically, what they've done now is so they've taken away. You used to have to have the reasonable foreseeability of death. So you had to have a grievous and irremediable condition and the kind of reasonable foreseeability of death. And so right now, you don't have to have a reasonable foreseeability of death. They've also taken away a mandatory waiting period. So same day death is theoretically possible. There used to be a cooling off period of, I think, of a period of time. And they've also, I believe, within the next 2 years, the Senate added on and sort of an additional portion of this, that within 2 years, I believe people with mental illness would also be potentially qualify for this. So as of right now, you have to have an actual grievous and irremediable condition. But because they've taken away the foreseeability of death aspect, that could just mean that you have a disability. Like you could be, paralyzed or something. And that's, death is nowhere near for you, but that's a grievous and irremediable condition. So they've kind of expanded it now so that just someone with a disability, but who's not dying, could qualify. But eventually and potentially soon, we'll have mental health being one of the reasons as well, or depression or anxiety.
So basically, Ontario is going down the slippery slope that people say exists.
Yeah, well, that people
it's real. It's real.
Right.
It's a logical slippery slope.
Yeah, that people say don't exist, but yet we're traveling very quickly down the non-existent slippery slope.
Well, in Scotland, we're teetering at the top of the slippery slope. There is assisted suicide legislation at an early stage in the Scottish Parliament. It's been defeated twice within the last 10 dozen years or so, maybe more. But it's back now. And it's probably going to be touch and go whether it passes. My feeling is that I think it will by a small margin. We haven't got assisted suicide or euthanasia in any form. So I think you're clearly, that's clearly one where Canada is. Now,
let me ask you,
in a worse state.
So in England, like in the UK, is there assisted suicide?
No.
Okay, well, that's good on you guys for that. That's great.
Yeah, there's a very vigorous campaign. And there have been various attempts to bring it in at UK level, which wouldn't actually apply to Scotland. There have been a lot of attempts, but they've been defeated. But in Scotland, there's been bills brought forward twice. The first time it was defeated by a very big margin. The next time it was defeated by a smaller margin, but still decisively. My feeling this time is, sadly, I think it will pass. But in the Scottish Parliament, there are 5 parties. 2 of them have got it as their policy to introduce assisted suicide. One of them, this ruling SNP, they had it in their manifesto to open up debate about it. So they were like half in favour of it. And the other 2 parties are neutral. So, I mean, what's the only possible direction of travel when you are half the parties in favour and half the parties neutral? I mean, inevitably, it's going to come. That's where it's heading for. So, right, we've got time for one more. I'll let you choose in the interest of fairness. I was going to talk about sort of state interference in family life, children's rights, that sort of thing, or abortion. Right.
Well, I have a feeling that Canada might lose on the abortion side of things, or win, depending on how we'll get the point for that. And I have a feeling the state interference, you guys might get the point on that. So
should we try and do them quickly? Well, what's your score with abortion?
Well, so in terms of our law, we're going to be worse than you for sure, because we don't have a law. Our law that we used to have was struck down in 1988 by our Supreme Court, and it was never filled with another law. So right now, there is no criminal prohibition against abortion at all. Practically speaking, obviously, very few abortions happen in the 3rd trimester, for example, but some do. The majority happen, early on. So practically speaking, we have no law whatsoever. And I think that we have about 100,000 abortions per year in a population of, 37 million or so. So I'm not sure how you guys stack up to that.
I can't do that in my head, but law-wise, that's worse than in Scotland. There are powerful forces pushing towards decriminalisation. To be honest, the government, again, there's 2.5 parties, no, 3.5 parties in favour of it in the Scottish Parliament, and there's one party that doesn't care, has no policy. So it's very much heading that way.
Now, let me
So
just ask
over,
you, okay, so you're permitted to have abortions up until a certain gestational period or something, or how does it work?
there's a time limit of 24 weeks, apart from in the case of disability and other sort of exceptional reasons. So basically, it's a 24-week limit. But the Labour Party, the Green Party, and the Lib Dems, is their policy to have full decriminalisation. Again, the SNP, they fund organisations that argue for it, so that they're basically campaigning for it using sock puppet charities. They don't want to say it themselves, but they want to pay other people to say it for them. And the Conservatives, as ever, the party of stern moral principle, have no policy and don't care. So that's the situation. I think overall, Canada's got to take this one. We've got a couple of things, though. Currently, abortion at home, like where you sort of get pills delivered to you or sent through the post, and then women having abortions at home. There's quite a lot of risks associated with that. That was something that came with the pandemic. Yeah. It's currently an open question about whether or not that's going to be made permanent. And the other thing we've got is we're heading towards a ban on, like, for example, prayer vigils outside abortion clinics as well. Have we got either of those two issues?
Yeah, so actually right now in Ontario, there's been a bubble zone in place now for several years. So there's a certain area around, even hospitals, if they're the only provider in town, where you can't protest at all, even if it's, a prayer vigil. So yes, we've had that for several years here.
Yeah. And the abortions at home?
I'm pretty sure you can get, I'd have to ask my wife, who's a nurse practitioner, but I'm pretty sure you can get that. But I don't know exactly how easy it is to do that.
Right. Well, then that one's gone to Canada. At the moment, the score is it's 3-2, Scotland to Canada. So just the last one. I'll just touch on this very quickly. In Scotland, the basic principle is that 12-year-olds can make their own decisions. So, for example, a 13-year-old can go and have an abortion and the parents won't be told. A 12-year-old can go and see the doctor saying that they've got a drug abuse problem or a mental health problem or whatever, or they're changing gender at school, all these sort of things. And at age 12, they're regarded as having authority to make their own decisions and to keep things secret from parents. Is there anything parallel to that in Canada, too?
Well, we don't have a specific age like that. The age of majority is still 18 for most things. But practically speaking, it is possible for a young woman under 18 to go in and get an abortion without parental consent. There's various things they can do. So I think in practice it's similar for many things, but the doctor doesn't necessarily have to do it either. So I suppose if you had a conscientious doctor, they could just say, "Listen, I'm not comfortable to do that," or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I've just realized I made a mistake adding the scores up. Let me just check. 1, 2. Right, the final score is actually 3-3.
I thought we were closer to being tied. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've spent all this time trying to settle this question once and for all. We've ended up with a draw. I mean, looking into the future, what do you see? What are the prospects? I mean, is Trudeau on his way out?
He just announced a deal right now with the further left NDP to uphold his government for the next up until 2024, 2025. Whether that deal will last, I mean, who knows? But I think honestly that people are looking for true leadership in this country. And we've seen an ever decreasing vote turnout for Trudeau's successive elections, but there hasn't been compelling leadership that provides an alternative. So I think if we could get some compelling leadership, he would certainly have his work cut out for him. But as it stands right now, he's committing to run again in 2025, and he has a deal with the NDP to uphold his leadership. But I think his day of reckoning is coming, and it will happen, I hope, within a few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's hope so. With the picture in Scotland, the outlook is it's hard to envisage the point where the SNP and the Greens are going to be out of power. So I think we're on the same trajectory. But our mission as the family party is just to have some people in the parliament who are going to challenge these things. It's not like 2 votes is going to make much difference, but just to challenge them and to actually say what isn't said at the moment, and then hopefully start to shift public opinion and wake people up these issues. So, yeah, well, I certainly wish you well with your endeavors. Do keep us informed. It would be great to have you back on sometime to see how things are going.
Yeah, I'd be happy. Be happy to do that. And I'll just add quickly, to even have one voice in Parliament, I was able to accomplish much more as an independent than I was as part of the Conservative Party. And, to be in Parliament and to have a voice there, it resonates. And you may be one or two people, but you can be a rallying point for other people in the country. And it's certainly a way to get your message out. So by all means, I encourage people to support parties like yourself that, may be small in numbers, but your voice can magnify many times beyond the size of your party.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I'll just say a couple of things before we wind up. Just a reminder, if you're interested in being a council election candidate, email chairman@scottishfamily.org, chairman@scottishfamily.org. One last thing I will just say is this. Basically, we don't want this sort of comment. Not interested. If you've got some anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, this is not really the place to come and share those because we're not interested. And just to finish off, so thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments. I know we haven't brought any on, but I've been keeping an eye on those. So and thanks to those of you who are watching later. So we'll say goodbye to Derek and see you next week. Right. Thanks very much, Derek, and hopefully see you again.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.